There we go. Well, if I'm choppy, it's because it looks like I'm having some technical difficulties. But I wanted to welcome everyone today. This is our 23rd Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshop, the end of the grant that was issued by the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And the initiative to uh, get this started, I partnered with Sharon Rossmark and Evan Morelli, and we presented a educational program directly to focus on the safe flying, the safety of flying and integrating drones within the manned aircraft. Also, education, public education, to make people aware, the general public aware of this new evolution of unmanned, uncrewed aircraft systems. And I feel like it's been really successful. We've actually had an audience of very beginners in this industry, all the way into very intricate industries. In other words, like Bell and Half that are here locally, that have really created and developed drone taxis and drone cargo. And all the platforms that we have, the software platforms with the LiDAR and the photogrammetry, and just the way that the drones are used as a tool to enhance what man is doing right now. So I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to have these workshops. And I'm very honored that I got to work with Ernest Huffman with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, who also leads the Safety and Integration Committee that is derived of government and educators and just individual businesses in the UAS. We also want to thank, of course, our sponsors, UVSI, the Lone Star chapter. Adrian Doko has been very involved in helping us put together some of these programs. Again, with Sharon Rossmark, Women in Drones, and Evan Morelli, Elm Services, Les Pens and Chariot, Drone Plus, Half, just wonderful sponsors. Let me think. Fox Fury, another one that's really been with us through the whole the journey of the evolution of UAS. So I want to start. I feel that this was a great way of ending the workshops, is with two women that have been such a has really been involved and really impacted the direction of the UAS industry. I think that Dawn Zaldi, who's going to be speaking first. Dawn, I'm so glad you joined us. I really feel honored. She has been a mover shaker. I don't know how she has all the time that she does. She owns her own company, Tech Consulting. She comes from the Air Force as a JAG. But let's go ahead and start, Dawn. I want to know a little bit about your background, how you got involved, and then I really want you to focus on how you created your P3 Tech Consulting, people, platforms, and policies. I think that that's going to be really key. And then I want to hear a little bit about, what you see now, what you saw in the beginning when you first started in this industry, and what you're seeing. Because one of the things that I admire about you and Sharon, that you get out there and you really talk to the public, you really talk to the industry, you really know what direction they're going and what their main concerns are and their focus. So go ahead, Don, take over.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you everybody for listening in. Incredible team there in North Central Texas. I've been admiring what you've been doing, and it's a real honor to be back. I was here at least once, if not twice before, at various times during your shows, and it's just such a privilege. So for those that don't know me, as Maggie mentioned, I'm Dawn Zoldi. A little bit about my background, because Maggie asked about kind of how I started and how my company's evolved, and then of course, what I'm seeing in the drone industry in particular. So I spent almost 25 years on active duty in the United States Air Force as a JAG, which is a judge advocate, military lawyer. So if you've seen the movie A Few Good Men, it's kind of like that, but not really. So that's where I started my career. And that's really where I got inspired and sparked a passion for drones, working for the Air Force. So there was a period of time where I was at U.S. Central Command. That was with General Mattis. What an incredible time to be there. But because I was the airman, right, in a joint office of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines at the time, they're like, oh, you're Air Force, so you do drones. And I can't really talk much about that, but I'll just say that I really got to understand the operational side of drones and what the Air Force was using them for, particularly in Southeast Asia. And it was really my next assignment where I was kind of on the flip side of that, whereas Central Command is a combatant command, or, basically the warfighting forces. That's why it's joint. On the Air Force side, which is kind of the organized, train, and equip arm, I was actually at a place called Air Combat Command, and our job was to basically part of the duties there were to be the functional managers of the large drones, the Group 4, Group 5, as they call them in the DoD or Department of Defense, UAS. And so we're talking Predators, Reapers. And so Air Combat Command was in charge of the organizing, the training, the equipping, purchasing, all of those things you could think about when it comes to all the things you need to do to prepare people then to go over to places like CENTCOM or to combatant commands. And when I got there in 2012, after my CENTCOM tour, this was a time where Iraq theoretically was winding down. And so we'd have these pilots, these remote pilots that have been flying drones overseas in combat for like 10 years. And now physically the aircraft were coming back. And what we were seeing was every now and again popping up in the news was, oh, look, X wing commander at X base has approved, or used a Reaper to find a lost hiker in the forest or something. And this is kind of legally nuanced. Again, I was the lawyer. I was the chief of operations law then. That's a significant thing to use military people or platforms in support of law enforcement efforts. It's what we call defense support of civil authorities. And there's very high approval levels for a reason. It's because you don't want the military enforcing the laws in the United States or acting like an adjunct arm of the police. You can see where that could be a problem, right? Back to our founding fathers, they had a concern with standing armies. And so they wrote things like that into the Constitution. And then after the Civil War, Congress created this thing called the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits using the military to enforce the laws. And so that's why it's a rarity to actually have the military assist police in things, even if it's a great thing like finding a lost hiker. And so because these things were happening and frankly, people weren't getting the right approvals, my boss approached me at the time and he was just like, all right, we need to get our arms around this. We need to be clear on what the approval authorities are, what the rules are for operating domestically in national airspace versus being in a place like Iraq or Afghanistan. And so that kind of started my journey. And it was a big research journey. Like I just sunk my teeth into everything I could read, everything I could find. And quite frankly, I found like this 2006 policy. Remember, we're talking 2012 now. So a 6-year-old policy sitting in some room that nobody knew existed that outlined what you had to do. And so with the kind of mantle of my one-star boss, I went to the Pentagon. I started this thing called the Department of Defense Domestic Imagery Working Group. And we gathered lawyers from across the DoD, operators, policymakers, intelligence professionals. And we just sat around a table for months on end, really coming up with looking at that policy and deciding, should it be different? How should we, what do we keep? What do we change? And ultimately, we wound up creating what the DoD adopted in large part, almost all of it, except for one thing which I'm not going to get into, but and in 2015, that policy was signed out. So that really sparked my passion for this area of law and policy. And then on top of that, in the United States, around this exact same time, there was just a flurry of state drone laws popping up all over the place. If you recall this time period, I remember Rand Paul had like this 13-hour rant of a filibuster, Senator Rand Paul, when they were trying to get John Brennan to be the chief of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or ODNI. And it was in the wake of that, the ACLU, right, the American Civil Liberties Union, and some other groups start passing around this kind of model drone act that a bunch of states start adopting, which basically prohibited local law enforcement from collecting or gathering evidence or information with a drone unless a certain exception applied. And so again, just doing a ton of research on this stuff, because that could potentially, without splitting too many hairs here, could potentially impact military operations in the United States. And so did a lot of writing, started publishing scholarly articles, started kind of doing the speaking tour, even as a colonel. And that's what I was at the time, by the way. I came to the Air Force Academy out of that job. The United States Air Force Academy here in beautiful Colorado Springs, where I now live, has a remotely piloted aircraft center where they train cadets. They also have a law department where they teach cadets about military and other laws. So, I continued keeping my toe in the water, if you will, on drone law. But it was really in 2019, and I know Sharon's on the line here. She's heard the story, Maggie's heard the story, and maybe some of you have, but I tell it to anybody that'll listen, because women in drones really substantially changed my life. I won the 2019 Women to Watch Award for leadership for all the things I did with regard to drones during my military service. And at this point, I had already retired, and I was a civilian attorney, still working for the Air Force at the Air Force Academy. And that was just a pivotal moment in my life and in my career, because I had people like Sharon, who, by the way, kind of became one of my first clients. She came to me and said, "Hey, you just received this award. Can you make it better? Can you help us make it better?" And so I started doing a strategic plan with her. I had Interdrone, where we, did the Women to Watch Award luncheon every year. At least up to that point, it's since grown to CES and whatnot. But Interdrone came to me and said, "Hey, with your background, we'd like to attract lawyers. We'd like to attract more federal and DoD people. How can you help us?" And so they became one of my first, potential clients. And then I met Richard Fisher from Inside Unmanned Systems magazine through Major General retired Air Force James Poss, who's now the CEO of ISR Ideas, and he's one of my mentors. And I started writing a legal column for their Inside Unmanned Systems magazine. And so, with three major kind of deals knocking on the door, I realized, boy, I need to create a company. So I went to my bosses in the Pentagon, and at this point, they already told me, drones are not your day job. Like, stop doing drone stuff, which was kind of interesting after I won the award. They're like, "Why are you winning awards for drones? You're a business matters attorney." So I created the company and resigned from the general counsel just a couple months later, because it got real weird real fast, which, is what it is. Wound up flipping over to the Center for Character and Leadership Development at the Air Force Academy as the deputy director there. So I tell everybody, leadership by day, drones by night, which is what I did all year long in 2020. Built my company up, and that was a 1-year position, and went full time into the company in February 2021. And so it's been a little more than a year full time in my business as a full-time entrepreneur, and it's been absolutely incredible. The business has morphed and changed, just like the industry has morphed and changed. So, when I started out, like I said, those were my first 3 major clients. I was doing conference planning. Out of that arose my my podcast called Drones at Dawn, which was with Interdrone. And that was every Monday on the Interdrone platform. And did that for a long while there in 2021. And, Interdrone kind of went a different direction. And the producer, the chairperson, Mike Peel from Interdrone, he left there. I left there. We bonded together, and we went to Drone Life, and we created Dawn's Drone. the Dawn of Drones podcast. So it gets confusing, but we rebranded for a reason. And we kicked off that podcast about a year ago in August. It's been amazing. And that's really, between that podcast and then the clubhouse I do with Maggie every Thursday called Drone Law Connections, which is connected to the Dawn of Drones. We get to talk to all kinds of amazing companies and people. And that really that keeps our finger on the pulse of what is happening in the industry. That, and of course I do so much more, the research I have to do for all the different magazines I write for. So I've since expanded from Inside Unmanned Systems magazine, Inside GNSS magazine, Drone Life, UAS Vision, Military Embedded Systems, and the list goes on. And it's just been a ton of fun. We opened up 2 additional platforms, Full Crew and Full Tilt. We could talk more. Maggie, go ahead, ask your question. I'm monologuing.
I was just saying, yeah, I know I'm still having to log off and log on. But one of the key factors I see the way with process or the way that you have gone through this process, you have their picture, a wider picture. You know that everything is connected. It's just not the drone connectivity, but it's the tech, that's supporting the drones. And then of course it's the entity of how they're going to monitor this integration. So I think that
Maggie, you're so broken up. None of us can hear you. So I don't know if you want to just type your question in the chat. I think that might be better, just because it's so broken up. We can hear every maybe 5th word, if that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I think what Maggie was at. So Probe, I agree. It was difficult to hear Maggie. I think what Maggie was alluding to is the fact that, I'm covering more than just drones. I'm covering the emerging tech industry, and that's absolutely correct. My business has evolved into consulting. I'll call it branding, content creation, some of the things I just talked about. And I'm happy to talk more about those, as well as education, because I have a Law Tech Connect brand. And we did our very first workshop this year in conjunction with AUVSI Exponential. It was an incredible day that kicked off the week at AUVSI in Orlando this year. And, we had about 80 people there, and it was great. We had 8 panels. The day qualified for continuing legal education credits for lawyers. And, everything from, what are the enabling technologies that and the legal issues like spectrum, 5G, counter drone, to public-private partnerships, that kind of military-civilian connection, to the future of drone regulation. So it was an amazing day. But yeah, and so Ernest, if you're here, Maggie's asking you to take over, please. But in the meantime, yeah, so I don't know, Ernest, if you wanted to kind of jump in and ask me questions. So I can keep monologuing all day, but I don't want to bore your audience.
No, give us some more and I'll think up some questions. Okay,
gotcha. So as they say in the Air Force, flexibility is the key to air power. So no worries there. I want to talk for a second about, when we speak about emerging tech and some of the platforms I have, shameless plug, this is my Full Crew limited edition mug. The Full Crew is something Mike and I created this year. It's a podcast every Monday, 9 a.m. Mountain Time. If you haven't subscribed yet, check out fullcrew.io. And we also have a handle on YouTube. So subscribe to Full Crew on YouTube. What we do is it's tech industry news every week. So me and Mike co-host this thing. We grab 2 guests from industry. And when I say industry, I'm talking emerging tech. We have upcoming, I think in 2 weeks. Let me think about this. No, this week we actually have the Defense Innovation Unit Blue UAS program manager, David Mickelson, and then a local guy from Colorado, Taylor Albrecht. We're going to be live from the UAS roundup in Buena Vista, Colorado. Me and Taylor, he is head of the new rebranded Mountain West UAS. They used to be Central Colorado UAS. But that's who's going to be on Monday. And we all grab an article. We don't coordinate with each other. And we just talk about something in the latest headlines. And it's so funny. Every week a theme emerges. Like we don't coordinate this, and every week it's something different. This past week we had Cam Shell, CEO of Dragonfly, and this guy, the CTO of Bellwether Industries out of the UK, but this guy's in India. His name's Vijit Jacob. And we wound up just, and by the way, Bellwether literally creates flying cars. I mean, they look like Speed Racer's car. Remember that cartoon, like from the 70s and 80s? But they're literally flying cars these guys are creating out of the UK. And we wound up talking about AI, like almost a whole episode. It was so fun. And who knew? Vijay is an artist. And so then on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, we have this thing called Full Tilt. I really tapped into my leadership background, you know, not only as the Center for Character and Leadership Director, but also just being a military leader for as long as I was. Leadership is, well, and I won the Leadership Award for Women in Drones. Leadership is something I'm really passionate about. And this podcast is literally just people's leadership journeys. And this week we had Jamar Williams from Promodrone. And I'm just telling you, you need to go on there. I'm just getting chills thinking about it. You know, people are sharing things like you would not believe. You know, Jamar shared how when he was 11 years old, he was actually arrested living in Baltimore, and, you know, the things he had to overcome, you know, in his life. And Cam Shell talked about being homeless, being a drug and alcohol addict after 9/11 for a number of years, losing millions of dollars that he had accrued up to that point. So, you know, when you think about like life and resiliency, these are incredible entrepreneurs that are doing great things for this industry, and everybody has their own walk and creates their own culture in their organizations. And I think there's so many lessons to be learned. So the Full Tilt is every other Tuesday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And then on the alternate Tuesdays, we do a Twitter Spaces, which is kind of like Clubhouse. It's a drop-in audio chat, but on Twitter. And we do that full crew. So they're, again, grabbing the news articles and we're talking news. So we're doing a lot more news on the leaderships like every other Tuesday. But we've had guests like Hui Tran, the head of NASA Ames Aeronautical Research Directorate. And she's unbelievable. She talked about how she grew up in Vietnam. And as a little girl, 6 years old, was taking care of her little sister and her mom during the war, and how she emigrated to the United States. And now she watched the moon. She watched the moon landing, and she thought to herself, I want to work for NASA. And here she is leading one of their directorates. I mean, talk about just these incredible stories. So I hope you guys check that out. I also write for a lot of magazines. Go ahead, Ernest.
Let me ask you, Don, let me hop in there, because you've been doing your podcast and interacting with the industry as a whole for a few years now, and you've pulled in a lot of top professionals in the industry on your podcast and all your other platforms. So since you've started, where have you seen the workforce development efforts going? Because I know when we started getting into this, it was almost always Part 107 stuff, small drone pilots, flying, real estate, cinematography, that kind of jazz. Yeah. So where are you seeing the workforce development in the future of the drone industry in that perspective?
Yeah, I've seen a huge evolution, Ernest. Let's just call it of professionalism. So not only, you know, like I agree with you. When it started out, it was like XY training company and literally just teaching people to pass the test with or without any hands-on training, right? So what you had was a lot of people just going out there, getting their Part 107, maybe never even flew a drone in their life, but could still pass the test. That's a little scary. I don't know why it still is that way, honestly. I think with the beyond visual line of sight, that's going to change over time. But what you've seen is groups like, for example, the Unmanned Safety Institute create a whole curriculum and CTE, right, for high schools, colleges, around this idea of UAS operations, including with an emphasis on safety management systems and safety. So if you go to USI's website, you'll see all of their different programs. Some of them are academically oriented, some of them are corporate oriented, but they're one of the groups, and you're gonna have to forgive me here. I'm gonna turn around real quick. I actually wrote my textbook for and with them. So this is just one example of some of the work they're doing. It's called Unmanned Aircraft Systems, Legal and Business Considerations, a Modern Primer for U.S. Commercial Drone Programs. And so now they've actually added a whole curriculum around drone regulations and policies. And, and they're going to add more into the future, right? So that's one example. Another example that I like to talk about because they're relatively new. And by the way, Unmanned Safety Institute, Josh Olds, he's been on the Dawn of Drones twice. He was just on in August because every August not every August, but every year we donate or we dedicate a month to workforce development or developing industry leaders, which was the theme this year. And Skydio sponsored that month of the podcast. And Josh Olds from USI was one of our guests that month. Incredible people like Tony Reed from Drone Cadets and Jasmine LaFleur from Greater Than Tech. Okay, those were some of the people. In addition, of course, Anna Wiesenthal-Birch from Skydio kicked off the month. Another group I want to talk about is the Sonoran Desert Institute, SDI. You guys may not have heard of them, but man, they just came out like in January, literally at CES. Sharon and I met them. They had a booth at CES, and a really interesting backstory. They started out in Arizona as like a gunsmithing, like training and education organization. That was like it was all about like guns, and it was they spent a number of months leading up to January, then launched this whole unmanned platform, which is outright like it literally tracks the United States Air Force's training for their remote pilots. So they've got a guy named Lieutenant Colonel retired Fred Bevetto. He's their test and evaluation guy. But he actually created the original programs in the Air Force. He's like one of their main people. And Fred was on our Clubhouse back in June. So you can check that out on demand. And then John Miner is the dean and president of SDI. They sponsored the month of June, which was about emerging industry leaders, and talked all about their programs. And I did a couple articles, but they haven't launched them yet. Really, really cool stuff they're doing. It's totally professional. They talk about, their coursework, and I don't want to scare people away, but it actually has components of aeronautical engineering. So it's not just like take your Part 107. They're actually accredited online university, essentially, or educational institute, where you get credit, educational credit for that. Unmanned Safety Institute, you get like certifications that can translate into, working for specific companies. And they also developed a pipeline to work with companies. So I'm just going to talk about those two, and happy to answer more questions, but, and I encourage you guys to look at those websites for yourself and check them out, but different models, but just great examples of how workforce development has morphed over time to be so much more professional.
I get that. And then working with all these companies and having them on your pod and interacting with them, have any of them indicated that they're getting into educating of the youth on the platforms, getting them excited about joining the industry?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Now, those two specifically, I think USI, Unmanned Safety Institute, I feel like they're dabbling in the middle school arena, but not okay. like elementary school. Unmanned or Sonoran Desert Institute, SDI, is definitely adult focused. But that said, there are a ton of people doing great stuff with kids. Maggie knows this well. I'm not going to give them a paid commercial here, but which is not a paid commercial. US Drone Soccer, they're doing some great stuff. They put curriculum around what they do. Tony Reed, I mentioned, Drone Cadets, not only is teaching the kids how to fly, but also created a whole metaverse with augmented and virtual reality, and focusing on underserved and underrepresented populations in the New York area, and globally now. Greater Than Tech, Jasmine LaFleur, I mentioned her. She actually works for Raytheon in her day job. This is like a nonprofit she created in her, Maggie talked about me being busy. I mean, this lady, she's like unbelievable. And they're focusing on girls in particular, you know, minority girls, and inspiring them into STEM in general, but including drones. Skydio. Skydio has a whole host of programs where they're going out and meeting up with like schools in California, particularly girls. And they've now just created an internship program as well. So, and one of my very first guests, another woman to watch, is Megan Salter. Megan is from West Virginia, and won the education award in my class of women in drones, women to watch. And Megan created her own curriculum for elementary school kids. Now she works with gifted children in West Virginia. But, you know, people have been contacting her like, hey, where's this curriculum? Because not a lot of people have like an elementary level curriculum. But I'd say her and Tony Reed are probably two of the ones I'm aware of that are doing that level.
Understood. And just to fast forward the combo, how does remote ID impact future workforce development, impact the stuff that we're doing to integrate drone technology?
You know, that's a loaded question, Ernest, because I think it's yet to be seen what's going to happen with remote ID and how it could possibly negatively impact the workforce. Why do I say that? Okay, so for those that don't know about the rule, or you know, I'll give you a real quick, super quick overview. Either you have one of two different kinds of drones that have a remote ID capability, which means it's broadcasting out these message elements that include like a serial number of the drone, the velocity, the location of the drone in the air, the location of either the ground control station or the late, you know, the takeoff location, things like this, message elements. The whole purpose of this, so there's two ways to do it. Either standard remote ID drone, it's baked in, this broadcast capability is baked into the drone. And by the way, DJI and Wingtro were the first two out of the gate just this week to get approved declarations of compliance. So they're going to be compliant. And the compliance period starts like this week, I think September 16th, technically, for manufacturers. The FAA has given a 90-day grace period just because of the Race Day Quads lawsuit that had a lot of things uncertain. Manufacturers weren't going to start making these things if they didn't know what was going to happen with the rule. So the FAA has given people a grace period where they're not going to be actively enforcing it. But after the 90 days, they probably will. So either you're a standard remote ID drone, or you have what they call a broadcast module ID drone, where you're popping this thing onto your drone. Now, I don't know anybody's making those yet, but I guess we'll find out soon enough, right? So those are the two ways to comply. If you don't have this drone with the remote ID capability, and by the way, any drone that needs to be registered, which is almost any drone, needs to be compliant. If you're not compliant, then you're relegated to flying in what they're calling a FRIA, a federally recognized identification area. Now, these, again, a lot of uncertainty here, are going to be designated by community-based organizations or universities. They're going to have to apply to the FAA, all this. I think there was a policy or advisory circular that was put out for comment. Honestly, I lost track on where we are with the whole FRIA situation. But think about it this way, Ernest. If, you know, we always joke, you know, oh, look, everybody got their drones for Christmas, right? Or, you know, the holidays. So now when, you know, a little kid opens his box and gets the drone, unless it's a remote ID compliant drone, he or she is going to have to go find a FRIA, like literally cannot fly in their own backyard. And so when you think about like wanting to inspire kids, you know, like you're not now, unless you are remote ID compliant, going to be able to fly in a park. And they're not going to be able to fly in a park. Like they're not going to be able to see you flying, and they're not going to be able to fly themselves, right? Unless it's a FRIA or compliant. So I think we're going to see some second, third order impacts that are negative of this rule that people didn't think about, maybe think all the way through in the beginning. So I think that's a big downside to the rule.
Understood. And you mentioned DJI and another company just became compliant on for part remote ID. Does that mean that the current DJI stock on shelves will be remote ID compliant?
You know,
It's a next gen platform.
I don't know, Ernest, if you go right now, if they have a remote ID capability. I think DJI might, but you definitely want to check that out yourselves. What the FAA advertises on their website is that they have an approved declaration of compliance, or DOC, meaning the FAA has approved the DJI's means of compliance, which is whatever remote ID capability they're doing, the FAA has approved it. Now, whether or not it's actually in the drone, I'll tell you this much, technically speaking, it needs to be in there by September 16th.
Understood.
But like I said, the FAA has given a 90-day window for compliance for that.
And have you seen any locale around the country that's particularly ready for remote ID? Because I know here in North Texas, we haven't really done much. We haven't established any FRIAs. I don't know of any that have been established.
Ernest, I'm not tracking any either. And here's the other thing. It's one thing for the drone to have the capability. It's another thing for how you're reading it. So, like, again, this idea was, law enforcement, security agencies needed to know if there were non-compliant or bad people out there, right? If there's an incident happening, there's a drone involved in the incident, you want the cops to be able to track that down. Well, guess what? The cops don't have the technology. They don't have the money for the technology. And this also was supposed to be available to the general public. When I say this, the difference between what the cops, the law enforcement can get and what the public can get is that law enforcement is supposed to be able to triangulate the remote ID information message elements with the FAA registration database and potentially other databases, right? When they stop your car and they say, give me your license, they're pulling all kinds of stuff from multiple databases, right? That's just what they do. I don't know that any of that has been created, interfaced. I don't know that there's any capability for law enforcement to do this and by September 16th or in 90 days even. So the whole purpose of the rule was so they could, and where's the technology for them to do it? And then the public, all of this information, the message elements were supposed to be available to the public, including the drone operator's location in the case of standard ID drones, which has a lot of people up in arms, right? Especially the remote pilot industry. The operators are like, hey, we're already getting attacked. Why they need to know where I am. But I'm a member of the public. I don't know how I would find remote ID, like if a drone's flying over my house, what app I'm using, how that works. So it's really interesting. We have these compliance states. We've had this rule out there technically in final form since January of 2021. So well more than a year, and none of this is ready to go. Now, in the FAA's defense, they got sued, right? Race Day Quads filed a lawsuit on the constitutionality and procedural irregularities associated with the rulemaking. And at the end of the day, the court found in favor of the FAA, and that was just recently, like in the last month or so. So, just everybody's in a wait and see pattern, but yet none of these deadlines really have been pushed back. And where's the technology? So, this is going to be interesting to watch how this rolls out.
Understood. And by the way, audience, if any of you guys have any questions, raise your hand, type it in the chat, and we can get your questions to Ms. Oldie. Even you can ask her yourself. Another question: working with bigger companies and listening to what they're talking about, like the Amazons, the Wings, the Google Wings, Drone Up, those kind of folks out there doing the bigger mass scale drone operations. Where are they headed from a workforce development perspective, and what kind of jobs are they going to be hiring for in the future?
Well, that's a good question, Ernest. I think a lot of these companies are doing their own in-house training, or they have their own programs to make sure, for their own standard operating procedures that people, and when I think some of them are probably paying for people to get Part 107 certified. I don't know that they're necessarily doing Part 107 training per se. I know Skydio is with their Well, Skydio is exposing people to it, but they're also paying, like reimbursing people for getting their Part 107 license and maybe additional training. So that's cool. That's one example. I don't know specifically what Drone Up. The only thing I know about Drone Up, just because, early on, I actually visited them when they were in a Walmart parking lot near, like in Summerlin, near Las Vegas, Nevada. And they absolutely have SOPs. They're, these guys have military background. So, very rigid on, what they say, what their checklist is. And absolutely, my guess is they're training their own employees on their own, like, procedures and SOPs. But, from a workforce development standpoint, what are some of these big companies doing? I think there is a lot of support out there to encourage people to get their Part 107 license, to get familiar with drones, with the products, especially if they're making products, if they're doing drone deliveries like Drone Up and Amazon Air, obviously getting that internal training, safety management systems, things like this. That would be my assumption.
Per Maggie, we did have Wing last month, and they're hiring 107 pilots now, and I think a lot of those delivery companies are looking for Part 107 pilots with some experience to join.
All of them are. I know. Yeah. You probably know this better than me, Ernest, but I know Flytrex, right? They're expanding significantly in North Carolina and beyond, and they're having a hard time hiring pilots.
You hear that, Probe? We got Probe in the audience from North Carolina, represent North Carolina. Flytrex is in town, as you know, and they're hiring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would agree.
Oh, and Drone Express as well, looking for 107 pilots. I know Drone Up is, Wing. Yeah, you're right. Majority of the folks that I know of are indeed hiring. Now, Dawn, is there a sector of the industry that you really want to highlight as a place to look at on the horizon for folks interested?
Yeah, look, when I think about kind of what's going to be up and coming, there's so many use cases. I mean, I was just at Commercial UAV Expo this week in Las Vegas. Sharon was there. I think she would agree with this. Not only did we see a level of professionalism there and like 4,000 plus attendees, an unprecedented number of exhibitors, but what we started seeing also is a lot of enabling technologies on the floor. So in other words, it wasn't just the hardware companies. It was like the parachute companies, like drone rescue systems, Mobilicom, cybersecurity. They didn't have a booth, but they were running around talking to people. Elsight and their Halo solution, right? So what you're seeing is so many opportunities, what I will call in the drone ecosystem. So I would say, as you look out, what are the use cases that were shown there? What we're seeing is hardware and targeting specific uses, whether it's precision agriculture, whether it's delivery, right? So you have these, there's some plug and play for almost anything, but, delivery was a big one, Ernest. Amazon Prime was there. And what was even more shocking was they had this huge drone. People like their jaws dropped open. Oh my God, they have a drone on the floor. Amazon Prime is here and they have a drone on the floor. Right. So drone delivery, we also saw Workhorse Group. They're actually Rob Heber from Workhorse is going to be on my podcast on drones next Wednesday. But Workhorse actually creates electronic trucks, EV trucks, and they're launching their Horsefly drone off the roof of the truck for extended last mile deliveries. And so we saw a lot of like delivery. Drone Up obviously had a huge presence. So we saw a lot of delivery companies and kind of technologies to support deliveries. That's the wave of the future. The next thing I'd say, which we didn't see really any of it, commercial UAV, it's really not a shock because right now it's not quite their target. Advanced air mobility / urban air mobility, electric vertical takeoff and landing. I mean, that is the next big thing. So this coming week, I'm not going to get to go because I already committed to 2 other conferences. Can only be in one place. So I'm actually going to be at 2 places next week, but I can't be at 2 places at one time. Revolution Aero is something, I think it's happening in San Diego, San Francisco, somewhere in California. People are yammering about it. I think it's a new thing, but there's going to be a lot of general aviation and advanced air mobility folks there. So we just had the Future of Aviation conference co-hosted by Caltech and UC Berkeley that I went to in early August. Of course, Community Air Mobility Initiative. I mean, and Ernest, you know this because you guys have your corridor you're building and all kinds of stuff with NASA down there in Texas. So advanced air mobility is the next big thing, and the money keeps rolling in. I think Vertical Flight Society is up to well over 700 different designs in their eVTOL directory. So if you never check that out, check it out. Your mind will be blown by how many different vehicles are out there eVTOL. And, if you haven't subscribed to eVTOL Insights, that's out of the UK, or just eVTOL magazine, if you want to keep up with what's happening there, check those out because they do a weekly roll up and just incredible stuff happening. And what you're seeing, Ernest, this is crazy. Advanced air mobility or eVTOL companies partnering with what you would consider to be a drone ecosystem company. So Speedbird Aero out of Brazil, as an example, just partner with Eve Air Mobility.
Eve Air Mobility, yep.
And they're working on some, what do you call it? Not the training, like a virtual simulators for Eve. So, you can see where there's such a great synergy between people that are doing drone deliveries and people are going to be delivering humans on these eVTOLs. And, not only, the SOPs, the airspace, there's so much overlap. And that's where I think the future is headed.
Question from the audience. Do you know, has anyone created a pathway to mature students' understanding about UAVs from middle school through high school or elementary school through high school?
Yes. So right here in Colorado, actually, there's a lady named April Lanotte, Lanotte. She works for NASA, and she actually won the Women to Watch Global Award for Education last year. In her spare time, she's created this whole entire aerospace community and STEM community and ecosystem here in Colorado because she lives like 30 minutes from my house. And they absolutely have created like CTE pathways from middle school to high school. I will also say Unmanned Safety Institute is doing the same thing. They're working with middle schools, high schoolers, helping people get grant money, CTE money that's available. And the FAA has a whole host of, they've got a whole arm dedicated to not just outreach, but also education. So they're doing great stuff. And can you get a copy of the curriculum? Yes. And Probe wants to know, it's April, April, Lanotte, Lanotte. April is with NASA and she's in Colorado. I have her email, but I probably would need to get her permission to send it out. If I can, then I'll have Ernest send it out with this video, and I'll ping her today. But I'm guessing she's going to say yes, but I don't feel comfortable just sending that. The curriculum, I think April might be also a good person to ping on curriculum because she has personally been creating a curriculum for NASA for STEM outreach. And that's why she won the Women to Watch Award. She's been working with groups like Disney and all kinds of groups. So April's an incredible person to talk to in this arena as well. And I know she probably maybe there's a way we can get her to have Maggie. I know you got a big announcement. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I would recommend April as a future speaker. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, April's a friend of the family, and we can definitely get everyone her email address after we get her permission. Because I know what she's doing. She's very spread thin all around the country doing what she's doing. I met April working with the Choctaw Nation up in Oklahoma.
Yes.
She's doing some programming. So good stuff. And also, folks, for your information, here in North Texas, we have a few of those programs that introduce younger students to the drone industry. So we got the Bell Aerial Robotics Competition. I think that's a high school program, and they might have a middle school program, a middle school competition as well around drones. You can look that up. Just go on YouTube, type in Bell Aerial Robotics Competition, very robust, and they do that annually. Then we have the North Texas Aerial Robotic Initiative. I think that's 12 ISDs who've partnered together since around 2018 or 19. And they've to date got around $6 million to get drone related programs, or $4 to $6 million to get drone related programs into all those ISDs. So I know they got drone programs in their elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools as a part of that initiative. And that's been ongoing and will continue to be ongoing throughout the years. And I know they just received another grant for $2 million to continue that program.
And I know, and Bell is working with drone soccer as well. What I would say to Richard Clemens out there, by the way, he's in Alexandria, Virginia at, I'm assuming the George Washington Middle School is GWMS. You know, your students could absolutely go to my website. You should go to my website, P3 Tech Consulting. I have an articles tab. I have articles on almost any topic, and a lot of them are written at the kind of, you know, high school level, quite frankly. You know, so these are articles that I think kids could sink their teeth into if they have a passion for a particular area. And it's not just about laws. I'm talking about the technology. I'm talking about all of it. Also, all of my podcasts and a handful of my Clubhouse drop-in audio chats, they're all accessible through my website. So all these things I'm talking about, you can tap into almost all of my resources through p3techconsulting.com.
And Don, quick question, and from all the people you've interfaced in the industry, how many folks are traditional aviators on average?
You know, it's funny you say that, Ernest. You know, maybe it's because of my background. I feel like I run into a lot of ex-military in the drone industry, and I run into definitely. I don't really want to give a percentage on how many are former like crewed aviation. I feel like they're more the minority, honestly. I feel like there's just a whole new group of people that have been exposed to drone technology. And because with the ease of it, you can be 16 years old, never actually put your hands on a drone, still get your 107. I feel like there's a lot more people that have never dabbled, don't have any other kind of license for crewed aviation that are absolutely involved in the drone industry. And I actually had a guy come up to my booth, Ernest, I was with Sharon. This guy comes up to me, he's like, you know, I'm a commercial pilot, I do all this stuff, I'm looking to invest in drones. And this guy's the real deal. And so he wanted some, you know, advice, and that's why he was at the show. So what you're seeing now is some of this GA crowd, general aviation crowd, coming to shows like Commercial UAV. What you're also seeing is things like National Business Aviation Association, which again is the crewed aircraft, the GA world. You know, BACE is their big event. It's going to be mid-October in Orlando. They take over the whole city. They're having, you know, kind of a drone. They have drone people now and AAM people that are showing up and displaying and doing talks. So you're starting to see the convergence of aviation, because I always talk about this, Ernest. You've got your drone crowd, you got your advanced air mobility VTOL crowd, eVTOL crowd, you've got your like general aviation crowd. Well, guess what, everybody? It's one big crowd. And like, until everybody starts learning about each other and talking to each other, none of these industries are going to do well, because you have to actually work together, sharing the same dang airspace. So it's really, really important that these conversations accelerate especially as we grapple with UAS traffic management. You know, we're talking about remote ID. Well, that's supposed to be a stepping stone. Well, there's a lot more stones to step on to make this a reality, right? Sustainable and repeatable, and including beyond visual line of sight. So I don't know how much more time I have, Ernest, but I would love to really hit a diversity in the industry before I kind of close out my section.
Please.
All right. So, you know, diversity in the industry is something I'm also passionate about. You've been working with Sharon Rossmark and Marlene Conway Dials from the Diversity Development Network of Canada. We put out last year the first UAS AAM industry divert DEI study. We put out a survey. We got over 1,000 responses. I did talk about that here, I think, on Know Before You Fly earlier this year when that was released. We talked about the executive summary. We put out a large market report, and you know, and we just put out the second annual survey. And I'll be honest with you, Ernest, we're not getting the responses we were hoping to see. And I don't know why that is. But what I would beg everybody here, and I don't know, I can Google it right now, or Sharon or somebody in the background, somebody drop.
It's already there.
Oh,
Sharon,
the link's
put it
there.
in the
Thank
chat.
you, Sharon. I would encourage everybody to take this survey. This survey is not for women. It's not for women in drones. It's not for, you know, my buddies, you know, that I work with from P3 Tech. This is for the community and UAS and AAM both. So pass it around liberally to everybody you know, put it on your social, encourage people to take it. Why? We are creating a baseline, right? So let me just tell you super quick what we learned. We learned some things that weren't surprising. You know, is it shocking that the majority of not only workers, but also people in leadership in UAS and AAM companies, businesses, and organizations are white and male? Probably not shocking to most of us here. So what was shocking was, you know, how some of these other identities shook out, really, statistically speaking, at not just a worker bee level, but the C-suite level. And sadly, the Black and African-American community was least represented at every level. And, you know, so that's my challenge to all of you is, so what are we doing about that? And we, you know, people don't know, we're like, you know, me, Sharon, and Marlene, we're like those ducks on the pond, right? We've got the feet churning really hard underneath the water. You may not be seeing that, and we need to talk more about it. But, you know, we've been curating some content, some courses to help companies, individuals with you know, for recruiting, for retention, for just general awareness. Because here's the big reveal, everybody. And by the way, when you take the survey, you get our 125 plus page report from 2021 for free. And we were selling that for like $795, whatever it was. So pretty significant. You read the whole thing yourself, but drum roll, please. Here's the big reveal. DEI, it's a leadership issue. And here's what people care about. They don't care about getting unconscious bias training. They care about just being treated nicely, being appreciated in the workplace. That it's really that flipping simple. And so once again, it kind of dovetails into some of the work I'm doing and why leadership is so important to me and why I have a whole podcast dedicated to it. Because if you're not taking care of people, they're not going to stick around. And guess what? You're not going to be able to recruit people because that culture, that reputation gets out. And so, you know, it's people need those soft skills. They need to understand, you know, how to work with other people, how to listen actively, you know, just how to take care of people. So that's what I'll say about industry diversity. We've got a long way to go. But, you know, we're working hard on that.
Hey, Ernest, I think I can take over. I'm on my phone, but you know, this is the end of the segment for Dawn, and I wanted to thank you so much because you have such great insight. And to end with it, you know, having a diverse team is the strongest team. That's been proven over and over again in this industry. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. And, you know, going to the next segment, Ernest and Sharon Rossmark are going to be kind of taking over and really honing in on some of the things that Dawn has mentioned. So look forward to seeing your podcast and continue working with you on Clubhouse and spreading that word. And as you said, I like that little visual of the ducks in the pond. You know, the fact is that, yeah, that it's true grit. It's you just stay with it. You know, there's going to be discouraging things. It's going to be hard sometimes, especially when we're trying to break through to the general public about how important UAS and the emerging technology is. So thank you so much, Dawn, for your time and for your expert opinions. again, I'm thrilled to work with both you and Sharon. So Ernest, on that note, do you mind taking it over and talking to Sharon?
Yep. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I got Sharon Rossmark with us today. She's the CEO of Woman in Drones. And we're just gonna have a quick talk about what she's seen and what she's learned about the workforce in the industry and the future that she sees for all of us. Sharon, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Ernest. I'm pleased to be here as usual.
So to start, I think our main question, and we wanted to frame this, is the drone industry the next gold rush, right? And just to remind folks what the gold rush was, so the California gold rush was sparked by the discovery of gold nuggets in the Sacramento Valley in early 1848. It was arguably one of the most significant events to shape American history during the first half of the 19th century. Now, I'm not gonna forget about all the bad things that happened with that gold rush, right? But under the context of that California gold rush, the opportunity it brought to a lot of folks who weren't in a mining industry. I imagine folks who matriculated out to California came from all manners of life, right, Sharon?
Right.
Would you consider your industry the next gold rush?
So to answer your question, in some ways, yes. And I'm going to give you a few examples because I really think it's a great analogy when you think about the bigger picture. So a couple of things. In our industry, new entrants to the market are looking for the new money, right? I think the conversation we just had with Dawn right at the end there is, people are coming in from a broad base looking for where are the opportunities to make money in this industry. So that's what was going on with the gold rush. They were looking for ways to make money. And the career opportunities is the fastest growing sector of aviation, right? So similar to the gold rush, it was the fastest thing growing at the time back in the mid 1800s. But the other similarities that I would share with you is that the gold rush attracted people from around the world. Now, it wasn't just going on here, but it brought in a host of immigrants from around the world. And when you think about today's true UAS and AEM sectors, the industry is a global engagement. You just can't think about doing it here. So similar to the gold rush, it attracted people from around the globe. Prospecting for gold was a very costly enterprise. The same is true for our industry. It is nothing inexpensive about this industry. It costs you money, regardless if you're an operator or a manufacturer, it costs you money. The gold rush was a male-dominated industry, okay? It's true for aviation, and it's still true also for our sector. And then one more example, more fortunes were made, now check this one out, more fortunes were made by the merchant than the miners. So those people that were selling products and services to the miners because they were coming from someplace, they needed someplace to live, they needed someplace to eat. So, there were some trends, and we're seeing trends now that show that in today's environment, those that are selling to the operators and the end users, they're the ones that are seeing a consistent revenue stream. So take note, folks, of you all out there looking for where's the money. If you're not an investor, maybe there's an opportunity to retool and look for ways to sell to those who are trying to make money in this industry. So just a few examples of, yes, in some ways, in many ways, it is the new gold rush.
In particular now too, because with the supply chain issues we were having with China, if you're in America and you're able to corner, monopolize a supply or a part that all these drones or a component that all these drones are going to need here in the United States and get that out there to these companies, you're going to make a boatload of money.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree.
And just to move the conversation on, and you said it's analogous to the gold rush, and I will agree with that. You've been around the industry for a bit. You didn't come from an aviation industry, though. What are some of the things you've learned over the years as a new entry or new entrant to aviation?
Well, it's interesting because as I think about that question, a couple of things. One, as you've indicated, I didn't come from an aviation or STEM or science or math and engineering background, right? I'm a business person. I came from 100 years in a totally different industry, specifically insurance and financial services. So that's a legacy industry. This is a new money, new industry. And so some of the lessons that I've learned actually apply regardless when you're changing industries or when you're just trying to figure out how to make it in business. You must have a focus, a clearly defined focus. Not that it won't evolve over time, but you must have a clear vision for your company, your goals, and you must stay on top of the changing trends that impact your business. I see so many times that people get distracted by shiny objects because it seems more glamorous than what you're doing. So every year and every few months, there's a shiny new product or program that can easily distract you from the focus of your company. Not that you shouldn't take a look at it, but I see so many small businesses get off track because they stray away from something that looks more exciting, more enticing, and they haven't had a chance to really understand what is the business opportunity and how do you make money with this shiny new object, because the person selling it to you, they're making money. That goes back to the conversation a few seconds ago about the gold miners, right? The merchants that are selling to the miners make more money. So be leery of shiny objects. And I said be leery just in terms of check it out to see how it fits with your business. So that's one lesson. The other one is collaboration is critical, a critical component of growth and survival. You can't go it alone. So that doesn't mean that that person with the shiny object or that company with the shiny object may not be a good collaborator, but you've got to do your homework. You got to know your strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to find collaborators that complement your strengths or your organizational strengths and can fill in the gaps for your weaknesses. Again, this is applicable across any industry, but I'm seeing it specifically as a huge opportunity here. So bottom line on that one is to do your homework on your collaborations.
And don't be scared to collaborate too. And I'll jump on that point because a lot of folks I know, they want to go it alone. They want to show folks they can do it alone. They want to prove to the world that they can beat the world, right?
Right.
No, you need to collaborate, work with folks, make it easier on yourself. Would say work smart, not hard.
Right.
Work
Exactly.
smart, not hard.
Yep.
Okay. Question. Where do you see the industry headed in the next 5 years, though? You heard me and Dawn talk about the Part 107 stuff that's been going on earlier, probably since 16 to now. Where are we going now?
Right. So similarly, I've been in the industry since about 2016. And from my perspective, I've been seeing increased activity around funding and interest in the AAM sector. But again, you got to figure out, is that a shiny object for you right now in terms of where your opportunities personally may be? On the UAS side, I think we're going to continue to see growth through consolidation. We're seeing more and more companies that are, I wouldn't say gobbling up, but they are more than just partnering. They're actually merging and bringing in that in-house, bringing that expertise to their company. So, maybe the bigger company is absorbing the smaller company. And then trends are also leaning less toward product development and more towards marketing and sales and staff development, meaning people have said, you know what, we've got to get off this development track because that's not bringing in the money and focus on selling our product, which means we have to find who our target market is for our product. We've got to market to them, and we've got to develop people that can sell and can make sure we can get our product to market.
And where do you see it as an opportunity for the normal person, the normal layman? Like if I wanted to pinpoint something in the next 5 years, I wanted to be this, where in the industry would you say would be the place to grab?
I think you need to look at what are your strengths and who can best utilize your strengths.
Yep.
Or who has a program that can bring you in and train you to develop that. And you all touched upon that in the conversation with Dawn a little bit. I know in my background, I come from, like I said, insurance and financial services, where they would bring you in and take you through 6 or 8 weeks of training the way they wanted it done. And those are invaluable skills that you will learn on top of what maybe you already bring. So you really have to define for yourself, what is it that is of interest to you, and how do you go about getting the training or education that you need? Does the company offer a program? And so many times today, people don't look at going to companies to be there 20, 30 years. Well, we know many of the companies that are here today won't be here 20, 30 years because it's an evolving industry. When we think about where the Wright brothers started, there were a lot of naysayers. We don't need to get across the country that fast, or I don't need to go from point A to point B. But they've said that with every mode of transportation, with every new technology, where would we be now without cell phone technology, for example? So if you've got a specific skill set or specialty, find someone or organization, I should say, that can use your talents and skills, because it's no longer on product development, or most part, it's not on product development. They are looking for people across a broad spectrum of skills.
Great. Now, I know you practice what you preach, and we talked a minute ago about collaborating, and you started Women of Drones yourself, but you didn't grow alone, right? You collaborate with a lot of great folks.
Yeah.
What are some of those companies or corporations you collaborated with that helped you grow and you thought made the best difference?
You know, as you probably know, Ernest, the reason why you probably asked that question, that list is very long. I did not do it alone. I came to this industry with never the intent of doing it alone, because again, I didn't have an aviation, general aviation or anything background, but I became a student of the industry in terms of learning what I needed to know. And it still came down to partnering and collaboration. And our collaborations are every company from manufacturers to software companies to service providers to even a lot and increasingly more non-industry partners.
As a Black woman, was it hard for you to collaborate with these corporations? Were there any barriers to working with them?
If there were barriers, they were their barriers and not my barriers. I just stepped up to the plate. I'm a firm believer that unless you step into the batter's box and take your swing, you know, some famous baseball player once said, I may have so many home runs, but they've got 10 times as many strikeouts or something to that effect, right? I have to ask. And again, I came from the insurance industry. If you want to sell something, try selling insurance. That's hard, right? So I figure, what I'm doing, I won't know unless I step up and ask. The worst they could say is no, and I take that as not now.
Yep.
I'll come back when I've got something else and see if you're interested.
Understood. Now, to pivot to another point, what are some of the centers of gravity for the industry that you've seen around the country now that you've been around a bit?
I can honestly tell you that I feel when you peel back the onion, it is three things: jobs, jobs, and jobs. There's not a company that I'm not connected with or talk to or hear from. I mean, we had, Dawn was talking about the commercial UAV conference. We had a booth there. I can't tell you how many companies have asked us, even pre-pandemic, can you help me find people with the skill sets to fill our positions? Unlike, I should say, just like any other tech industry and most industries in this post-pandemic environment, companies are looking for people with skill sets that they can fill jobs. And to Don's point about DEI, unless you have a welcoming environment that provides equal opportunity and access and equity. I mean, we being women in drones exist because we want women to have equity in opportunities in this industry. It's not about just saying, oh, we have a female on our leadership team. A female on our leadership team is not what we're looking to promote. We're looking for a cross-section of diversity in these companies. And so I would say that the gravity is around jobs/career opportunities.
Understood. And what are some of the people in the industry that inspire you? I know you're a great inspiration for a lot, and in particular, a lot of the women in the industry. I hear your name come up all the time. Everybody that meets you is very inspired by your story and the stuff you're doing for them. Who inspires you, though?
Wow. Well, I started thinking about this list and it became quite long. And since we only have less than 30 minutes, I thought rather than list a lot of names, because there are so many people that inspire me, I thought I'd give you a category, at least one category, because the list is very long. So I've been doing this since 2017 in terms of women in drones. I actually started in the industry a couple years before that. But for me, this journey of identifying women around the world to watch. So in this will be our 6th year. In our 6 years of doing this, we've identified over 30 women as the women to watch, for example. And when I look back at the unique position that we're in with women in 22 countries on 6 continents, I am in awe of what they have accomplished. Whether they are the first ones in the country to work with a major company with drone delivery, whether they're in a major player in drone racing around the globe, whether they're in a country that is remote and they feel isolated, but they're actively involved in drone delivery in their country. When you look at the limited resources and the barriers that many of them face, or you take someone like a Dawn Zaldi, who we just had on, when you take her background, how she has just jumped in, I always tell people, you want to change your life, be focused for the next 2 years. And you could be the next Dawn Zaldi, right? as an example. I mean, Dawn won in 2019, I think it was, right before the pandemic hit.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
look at where she is now, right? And so it's a focused, but it becomes, you have to focus. And I am just in awe of all of these women. But, you know, there are a ton of men that inspire me too. But even just coming into this industry is, you know, just talking to people is impressive. Most people don't come, I think you asked Dawn about this. Most people are not coming in, what I'm saying, with a general aviation background.
And that's why I asked that, because I come from the aviation industry. That's my industry. And you're right. Everybody from that side of the fence, majority of folks, no, they come from everywhere else.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're
These
and
are
they're
like their
figuring
second
it out.
careers.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're figuring it out. And to your point, many of them, this is their second and even third career. And they tend to skew a little bit higher right now in what we're seeing in terms of higher in age, which means they're bringing two or three different careers to the party, which can be invaluable if companies utilize them for that knowledge and that skill set.
Absolutely. Next question, and Dawn mentioned earlier, you got your DEI study, and that there were low numbers African American community represented, right? And I personally think that's a big issue with that. A big reason for that is an issue of networking, and that folks really, in particular from our community, we try to go it alone. I mentioned that before, that the networking isn't there. Sharon, what do you think? What's the importance of networking and us getting out there and shopping ourselves?
I would tell people that, you know, there's strong evidence to support that your network equals your net worth. In other words, building relationships with people in your network can help you grow your business. Exactly the point that you were making. And at some point in time, there was to be a saying that we're all 7 degrees of separation. And I would say in today's world, particularly with social media and a business platform like LinkedIn and others that have popped up, it is literally 3 degrees of separation from anyone. Now, that doesn't mean you should go out there and start Googling and reaching, you know, somebody that you want to talk to. You got to be prepared to talk to them. And you got to be prepared to bring something to the game that they would be interested in hearing. Yep. But it is, once you have that focus and you're not distracted by shiny objects, right? To the earlier conversation, the networking piece is invaluable. We have done a ton of promotion to get people to conferences. We partner with conferences. And what's interesting is what the conferences don't understand is that people can only go to so many from an affordability standpoint, right, and from a bandwidth standpoint, right? And sometimes the location of conferences is a deterrent. Everything that's west of the Mississippi sometimes is a deterrent, because if you're on the East Coast, that's a travel cost is a lot. So the conferences have to bring something of value to individuals. But to your point, to your question about the importance of networking and collaboration can help your company be more adaptable and resilient to change than anything else. And without that, you're going to die on the vine, or you're going to grow so slowly you may actually spend your money just trying to survive.
I absolutely agree. And you mentioned conferences. You've worked and you've done a lot of conferences around the world now. Yeah. What are some of those conferences you'd highlight to the audience that they should attend if they're really serious about this business?
Right. So, you know, I think this is an interesting question. Most people are likely to answer this by saying you should attend industry conferences, such as Commercial UAV, that was just this week. And I believe that those are a must attend. But if you got too many of them, then you're going to have to pick and choose. And those are important for networking. However, I would highly recommend that if you're going to pick 2 conferences to attend, you pick an industry conference of your choice, right? And you look at who's going to be there that you need to connect with, that you can't connect with otherwise. Because if I go to a conference and I'm hanging with the same people I'm already hanging with, right, and talking to and collaborating with, that's a totally different use of your time than meeting new people. But I would say that the second conference you need to attend, I would highly recommend that our audience members look at attending at least one conference that aligns with your vertical of your business, such as a construction conference or security or visual arts or GIS or environmental. Because I hear from people that are in these various verticals, and number one question is, I'm trying to figure out how to survive. Well, are you talking to people in that industry, and are you going to their conferences to hear what their needs are? To me, so yes, and at least one industry conference is a requirement, and then at least one, if not two, verticals that you are looking to excel in have got to be on your list to attend.
Those are great ideas. And I'll also add, a lot of localities and regions around the country are now standing up their own regional conferences. So I know Ohio does one, Virginia's doing one, or did one, or is doing another one. Dawn mentioned the future flight of aviation that was in California. If you're regional and you're in a region that has a conference that's local in your city, even go to that, because you'll meet local stakeholders, folks you can work with locally, and increase your local and regional network, as well as they always have folks from around the country and the world at those conferences as well. And it's at home, so you won't have to pay for hotel. I'd try for some of those as well if you have one in your backyard, because those have been really good. The ones I've attended to this year, those have been the best ones I've been to, those local regional ones. We did the Choctaw Nation one, and then the one in California at SFO was fantastic.
Great.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What type of job types and career types have you been seeing women matriculating to the most in the industry?
Well, interestingly,
And I'll say, Sharon, sorry to cut you off. I've met more women than men in this journey doing this work than I ever imagined, but go ahead.
well, I like to hope to think that women in drones help impact that, because I know anytime someone calls me, I always look for all the women I can help promote out there as a potential speaker or collaborator. But interesting enough, the pattern over time has not been that much different than the known stats for men. But a lot of that is driven by the fact that we start with the stats that are provided by the FAA. And they only do sex. They do male, they do female, right? And then from there, they just split out by category. So I can't say that we have seen much different from women in terms of matriculating, but what we are seeing, because again, our numbers, we capture data beyond pilot data, and we have a host of data about women from around the globe. So for example, we know women in other countries and the roles that they're playing. And again, consistently, they're not much different than men. It's just that there are not as many of them, but the numbers are growing. The numbers are growing on the women's sector of aviation.
Okay, understood. To women drones, I know you guys do some training programs you have. What are some of those training programs? Do you have a training opportunity upcoming?
Right. So thanks for asking that. So, everyone is doing training. It's hard to find a company that's not doing training, but our focus on training is more or less helping our network figure out where they can fit in the industry. Our network brings a wealth of business and world experience, advanced degrees. And I think a higher percentage, I don't know that compared to men, but I think a higher percentage of the advanced degrees. And we're able to navigate and fit their needs. So for example, we did one earlier this year on using drones for disasters. And what we can offer is a partner that can deliver that training in a safe learning environment. And what it helps them to do is understand what they may or may not want to do. And I'll give you a perfect example. In this 4.5 day training, which was outdoor in the heat, alongside public safety officials, because it was there in Texas, as you all know, Ernest, and Homeland Security. But it was about how do you use drones and the public safety, or use drones for disaster management or disaster relief. And we had a dozen women from across the country come in, and of the dozen women, after 4 days in the heat, you learn about, how to use these drones in active shooter, tornado, and flooding scenarios. It's a perfect example. Well, but the takeaway and the point I want to make is that out of the 12, the first 3 or 4 said, I am so excited to go back to my community. I now know what I need to do to work with public officials or public safety officials around disaster preparedness and how to use drones and how to engage with them. They know what additional FEMA courses they need to take. I would say the next group said, you know what? Great learning. So glad I participated. I don't see myself being the lead pilot, but I want to be a part of the UAS team and how we get that operational and fully function in the event of a disaster in my local community. Great. The third group said, great experience, love the learning, but you know what? At the end of the day, I need to know where I'm eating for lunch, where the bathroom is during the day, and where I'm sleeping that night. That is a very uncomfortable, I mean, disaster, and anybody that's lived through a disaster, it is hard, dirty, hot or cold, depending on the time of year, work. And they just said, I love this, but this isn't for me. And I want to learn about another vertical. And so we try and offer that safe learning environment and then expose them to the various careers and job opportunities, because these women are bringing advanced degrees. We've got so many women with masters and PhDs, and they're bringing 2 or 3 business backgrounds in terms of other industries. And they're just looking for, where do I fit in? How can I thrive? And so we focus on how to help women thrive in the industry.
So I hear you guys are working on a documentary.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so we're partnering with a film company out of St. Louis to develop a docuseries about the industry. And this is the first year of the docuseries. We've done 3 filming platforms, including this week at Commercial UAV, and we captured, I think this week alone, we did 25 interviews. But the documentary is about people as well as the innovation that are helping to shape this industry. And I give the example of, think years from now, when people look back and said, who were the people involved with creating drone delivery and AAM? I want to make sure, in my case, women have a strong presence in that story to be told. And so while we're capturing stories, we are capturing stories with men and women, but we're capturing a ton of stories of the women. And granted, 5-10 years from now, a lot of the companies, a lot of the individuals probably would have moved on to something else. But we want their stories told, because when you think about the Wright brothers, who of us can now go back and talk about who else was involved? I mean, they didn't do it alone, right? And so while that's a 100+ year example, we want to capture those stories. And we want to also, we think it also will give viewers an all access look into the people that were part of shaping the industry. We think that this will help with public acceptance, that when we start putting this out there next year, they will have a feel for what was involved with developing the industry, as well as where these visionaries, why they were part of it from a visionary standpoint. And then lastly, I really think that it's going to be critical, because when people look back, they'll go, now I get it. And we want to tell those stories now, not 50 years from now.
Sure, do you mind if I play the quick trailer for folks?
Oh,
We
sure.
got a few more minutes, but I know
Yeah.
we're cutting into Evan's time, but I'd love for folks to see this trailer, and then we can kick the can down to Evan.
Okay.
Okay, 1 second. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. Don't hear the sound though.
Those wagon wheel spaceships, and just, you know, it was all about the space program and engineering. So I always knew I was going to be an engineer.
Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the.
I mean, there is no particular reason why drones should be a guy thing. I'm Dr. Robin Murphy, and I'm the Raytheon Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at Texas A&M. When 9/11 happened, we deployed, the robots were successful. Somebody said, well, how many lives do you save? Well, it's kind of like asking a fire truck, how many lives does a fire truck save? It's the tools for the responders. And now things like drones, what we learn both on the engineering, but about what do we learn, how we think, how we interact, how they think, how to make a system that really helps. So within 2 months, I had fallen totally in love with all things robotic.
Currently, I work for the Florida State University Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program. I am the logistics chief and a UAS pilot. So I met Dr. Murphy at the Winter Institute in 2020, which is the exercise that I was hired out of by FSU. Needless to say, I was impressed by everything that she knows.
10 minutes, reprieve. Good job.
Just
Dr. Murphy's experience and vast knowledge, and Justin's also, I mean, it's just amazing that they've been doing this for so long.
Women in Drones is just wonderful, and being able to offer women who are serious about it. The call from one of my colleagues about this was like, oh yeah, these aren't just, oh, we're going to fly drones. Yeah, these are serious people who can do good things, and will take the knowledge and will teach others, but use it, and that's really exciting. This has been the best group we've ever trained.
That ends the documentary trailer. Great job.
Wow, that is
Very
incredible.
well shot. And I look forward to seeing more to come out of that project.
Right.
Last question, Maggie, and I just want to get this out there, and I know we got to jump to Evan. Evan, you got all the time you need. Sharon, what's next for Women in Drones?
Well, a couple of things. We're starting to receive inquiries and proposals from companies, mostly outside of the industry even, that are interested in our diverse, global, and established network. So we're looking at new partnerships and opportunities, again, all focused on how do we grow this industry, and even more so important to me is how do we grow and make sure that women have an active, engaged role in the financial opportunities of the industry. So look for us to continually evolve.
Thank you. Great job. Appreciate
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I think both of you, thank you, Ernest, for taking over and asking the questions, because Sharon, just seeing, I think I started with you 2018, we were introduced to each other, and then 2019, we were both really just going out there and finding out exactly how we could be involved and what we need to do. And I think we both accomplished a lot, and we continue doing it. So thank you so much. By the way, that particular documentary, how are you going to be able to view it? Is it going to be on social media? Is it going to be on TV? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so two quick things. One, we hope to air part one or premiere part one at CES this coming January. The only caveat to that is that Sony has come on board as a partner and provided the camera crew with their high-end equipment. And they said when they're ready to submit this to like a Netflix or Hulu, that's the ticket to the dance. To even just talk to them is the quality of the camera equipment and so forth that's used as a baseline. And then also they're looking at some film festivals to submit it to, because we're getting a lot of interest. And so those two caveats may prevent us from doing any early releases other than to continue to develop trailers.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. This is like, again, the last of our series, Before You Fly Your Drone workshop. And it's been a journey with you and Evan that I tell you, the takeaway has been remarkable. And we will continue. I mean, it's not the end. So with that being said, I wanted to give Evan Morelli an opportunity. Every time we do this workshop, he gets in the nitty gritty of flying safe in the air, the maintenance, the preparation, and everything that you need to take to fly your drone and to be a pilot, a responsible pilot. So go ahead, Evan.
Thanks, Maggie. So I'm going to go ahead and start by my PowerPoint up. Okay, so my name is Evan Morelli. I am going to be talking today, as Maggie mentioned, about, let's see, everybody see that all right? Okay, that everybody seeing the PowerPoint all right? Talk about pre-flight planning, and the nitty-gritty of, yes, you have these different verticals that you can be in, but there's some baseline considerations that regardless of what vertical that you're in, you're going to need to take into account, because you are interacting with a tool that's going to be in national airspace, and it's going to have a payload of some sort on it that you need a deliverable for. whether that's light data, whether that's transporting something, whether that's, whatever kind of collection that you may be doing from a sample set or what have you. These are going to be baseline considerations you want to take into account. And that's whether you're using a DIY drone or whether you're using an off-the-shelf drone. And there are some variations. I'm going to kind of get into that. So the first thing I have to talk about is pre-flight planning, and that comes from advanced, that's multiple months out when you first kind of get the conception of a project of a vertical you want to enter, all the way to leading up to a particular mission and a particular flight that you're trying to get into up until the day before, or the couple days before. So the first thing I want to talk about is drone considerations. So understand that there is a variation, as what was in Sharon's trailer. The professor was speaking about where do you put your technology. You have the ground state, you have what you put in the ground station that you have on site, you have the actual drone in the air, and then you have the back end, or what you take data to after the fact. And where do you put most of your load? If you have a super advanced, extremely intelligent drone that does all the computations then and there, something happens, that's a much more expensive problem. But if you also would have the capability of processing that data in real time, there's potential advantages depending upon what you're doing, versus maybe having more computer equipment down on your base station, maybe in a van or on a setup pavilion type situation you got going. And so then you can actually process your data in-house, but then you may have overhead as far as making sure you have enough electricity, actually the computer power there. If there's inclement weather, that could put technology at risk of getting ruined in water or rain or what have you. And then versus maybe having it all the way back on site, which may be your lowest overhead, but there's a delay between the delivery of the product that you're trying to deliver and not, again, depending upon your vertical. So you also need to consider, am I using a off-the-shelf drone or am I using a DIY drone? DIY drones are going to be way more customizable, and you'll be able to tailor them specifically to your needs. So if you're using, for instance, a LiDAR, there are great DJI drones that you can attach a LiDAR to. However, if you need specific flight characteristics, you most likely are going to end up with a DIY drone, whether you want to go with an octocopter, a hexacopter, so 6 arms, 8 arms, or even like a bi-quadcopter where you have 2 motors on 4 arms. For redundancy, that increases your safety factor, considering that LiDARs tend to be extremely expensive, several $100,000. So you have to take those considerations into the fact of how many channels you're going to need, whether you need onboard power to power your particular widget, whether or not there are some hydrogen fuel cell drones that you can get into. You can also use small gas engines to have a generator alternator type situation, whether you're using lithium polymer batteries, fuel cells. There's a number of different ways that you can go about configuring your drone to your specific mission that are going to be usually pretty outside of the off-the-shelf drones. Additionally, most of the DJI drones and Skydio, Autel, they're pretty much closed flight controllers. There's not a whole lot you can do unless, for instance, with DJI, you have the manifold that is an open programming block that interfaces with the flight controller. But if you get to something like, Pixhawk or CUAV that runs maybe like Betaflight or something like that, you have a lot more capability of interacting with your widget, maybe streaming the proper data that you want to stream. And then also having custom connection plans. So we'll go to the next one, connection planning. So custom connection planning, that's something you need to take into consideration, because you're now, regardless of what kind of drone you're using, people don't typically realize that you're actually interacting with the FCC, not just the FAA. So the FCC, they're going to be dealing with what the band waves that you're using to communicate with your drone. Now, typically the connection planning that you have with an off-the-shelf drone has an FCC ID that you'll see on the back of the transmitter or the receiver, and a lot of off-the-shelf third-party widgets oftentimes will have the FCC ID, so long as they're within the 2.4 gigahertz to 5.8 gigahertz. 2.4 being twice the range of 5.8 for half the data. That's Bluetooth. 5.8 being typically Wi-Fi if you need more data, but you're going to get half the range for the same power. There are other channels you can go into. You can go into 900 megahertz, 1.3 gigahertz. There are other options, but at that point, you are increasing your sophistication to the point where you're going to need shortwave radio licenses, and you're going to need to navigate the regulatory environment that the FCC has set up. So that's another consideration if you're trying to go, now we're going to be moving into the age where beyond visual line of sight, flying is going to be feasible to do as far as a legal regulatory standpoint. And that's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to see, that you're going to have these compounding base level skills in order to just access the capability to produce on your vertical. So that's something you need to take in consideration. So you're going to need to plan, okay, I want to go, let's say I'm doing a beyond visual line of flight, beyond visual line of sight flight, and I want to go over 3 miles away. Okay, well, now I'm looking at, okay, well, I'm using a 900 megahertz connection. That's going to stream very low amounts of data. So now do I say, okay, why do I want to collect all the data on the drone, have it come back before I process any of the data? Or do I want the data to be processed on the drone so it comes back done? And what are the power requirements? How much, computing power do I need to put onto the drone? And those are things that you're going to have to weigh and measure, because also, if you collect the data and the drone goes down, you've wasted multiple, however much time of data collecting, which can seriously hamper your project, and you may not be able to get that data back again. So that's something to take in consideration. Your connection planning is going to make a big difference on where you select and put your technology. Next thing has to do with RF interference. And this is kind of like a compound onto connection planning, because if you're out in a big field where there's virtually nothing but trees, the likelihood is you don't really have a whole lot of issues with connection planning as far as interference is concerned. However, if you're in a highly fractal urban environment, or let's say you're doing a inspection around a big metal bridge, or you even doing an interior inspection of a factory or some kind of refining institution or what have you, you're going to deal with crosshatching of your signal quite a bit. So now you have to take considerations of, okay, do I want to have it be fully autonomous and kind of just do its own thing, which means you have to front load on sensors? Or do I want to have it be more manually controlled, which means that my weak point that I'm selecting, my issue that I'm going to have to deal with, is I could lose connection with the drone. And if that's the case, then I have to set in protocols. Okay, is it going to sit still while I reposition? Is it going to automatically come back through the pathway that it went through? Those are called return to home features. Another thing that you need to, I would 100% suggest that you always have a return to home feature, especially when you're doing a professional job, so that, stuff happens. You lose connection with your drone. It is an invisible link with a object that's off in the air. So it needs to know what to do if y'all lose contact. But you also want to be aware that any metallic object, whether that be rebar, whether that be pillars, whatever, buildings, is going to cause RF interference to a degree. And also you need to understand, okay, well, is there a radio station nearby? Is there a cell phone tower nearby? Is there emergency personnel such as police, firefighter, ambulance, what have you around? Because sometimes you can get fade from their transmitting signals because it's in a bell curve, right? So you may interact somewhat with it. That could disrupt your connection. So taking not only the physical factors of wind and weather, which I'll talk about in a second, but also the physical aspects of your environment. Are you out in the field? Are you in an urban environment? But also the radio frequency environment, or the RF environment that you're going to be interacting with, are all going to be fundamental considerations with any operation, especially if you're doing emergency response and you're one of 60 drones out in the air, right? Making sure that you are on a dedicated channel and you don't get crosshatching. In drone racing, oftentimes they have to assign channels, because what will happen is and they're not in FCC ID'd license, they actually operate in kind of a neutral bandwidth where you don't need necessarily a ham license, but you can all interact together because you're low power and you're within this playground series of frequencies. But they'll all get assigned a frequency so that they don't interact with each other, because if they get on the same frequency, you can have potentially one controller affecting another drone. So, 1 second. Sorry about that. So with your drone, you want to check your OEM flight parameters. Check your weather conditions, your 24-hour land lead time. In a lot of places, such as near MOAs and other military bases, are going to require more lead time, and remote ID is going to affect this somewhat. So you'll be able to tell what you can and can't do. But generally speaking, You want to be able to understand, okay, well, I'm going into this grid for this particular flight, and it's going to be class A, class B, C, D, what have you, airspace. This is going to require these different flight restrictions. I'm going to look for temporary flight restrictions, NOTAMs, notice to all airmen, things of that nature that are going to affect my flight, because you are an aircraft interacting in the national airspace. So you have to be able to consider that. Now, for the North Central Texas region, if anybody's familiar with North Texas, our weather changes its mind every 5 minutes. So keeping a really good consideration of what the weather conditions look like is going to be absolutely pivotal, because the weather that you may be getting from the NAS in Fort Worth is not going to be the same one you're going to get up in the suburbs in Plano and Frisco, which is definitely not what you're going to get down in Seagoville, which is southeast of Dallas, which is definitely not what you're going to get down by Joe Cool Lake, which is south central. They're all going to be very different. And then it's not even going to be remotely the same as Eagle Mountain Lake, which is over by Denton, right? So you have all these different areas that are going to get anecdotally different weather. So I definitely suggest having handheld wind gauges with you, checking your local weather as far as the best you can see, and kind of understanding that, hey, you know, if there's rain, what does this can take as far as delaying our flight? Is the rain going to hit us? Something that you can do with, if you're a DIY drone maker, is silicone conformal coating is really good. If you have like an exposed drone, and I can't speak to like necessarily the widgets, but for the actual drone, what a drone racers will do oftentimes is they'll coat their PCBs, their printed copper boards, like the flight controllers, maybe not ESCs as much because they get hot, but a lot of their sensitive circuits with silicone conformal coating, and it effectively waterproofs it. So even if it's like a dewy, cold morning that may attract dew to your PCBs or things of that nature, then you can definitely kind of get away with a little bit more than that. So you want to pay attention to your weather conditions. I like to look it up a couple days in advance, kind of a good idea in case I need to reschedule and say like, hey, look, we're supposed to get rain this weekend. But then also I'll check it the night before, a couple hours before, just to double, triple check that something hasn't changed. Because again, I'm used to up here in the DFW area, weather changing on the dime. So asset care, and this is something I want to spend the last 10 minutes about because it's super important. Again, what we're typically using with these drones is lithium polymer batteries. There are some hydrogen fuel cell drones, there are some solar drones, there are some, you know, gas engine drones and things of that nature, but they're not the norm. They're not typically what you're going to see, and they are typically specifically for a particular performance component, like longevity in the air, things like that, or excess electricity for a more demanding widget. So with maintenance schedule, let me go battery maintenance, here we go. So with battery maintenance, you got to understand that with these lithium polymer batteries, you don't drain them down to zero. And there's two different types you're going to get. You're going to get the off-the-shelf, like DJI drones that have a printed copper board on them and within like a plastic mold press housing. And then you're going to get like naked batteries, which are straight up just going to be raw batteries that don't really do a whole lot, except for actually contain the electricity. I'm going to pull one out and show you guys real quick a couple of them. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and stop my PowerPoint for a moment. There we go. Let me share. Can y'all see me? Possibly. Anybody see me?
Yes, we see you.
Okay. So
yeah, so
this
we can see that. We can see the battery. Yes.
Yeah. So this is going to be your naked battery, and it's just all it's going to have on it is two main leads, right? And all this is a bunch of like graphene cakes. They're like they're little sliver layers that are put together in cells, and then they've got leads soldered onto them in some form of series and parallel. And they'll typically have, you can see here, it says 6 cells, 22.2 volts, and then the watt hours or the amp hours here, the 28,000 milliamp hours. So what that means is that it has 6 cells that run at a 22.2 volt. Now you take that that's 22.2 volts. If you divide that by 6, you're going to get it's like 3.4, 3.8 or whatever. But what that means is that though you'll see a combined voltage, and that's how you get higher voltage, is running them in series with one another. versus in parallel with one another just conveys to a total capacity. So these are one cell at 28,000 milliamp, and then there's 6 of them to increase the voltage. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. Yes. Okay. And so so those are going to be your 2 main types of batteries. And a lot of times, it's easier to deal with the fact that the batteries that you get off the shelf from like DJI and what have you are plug and play and they're good to go. But with the naked batteries, you get a lot more control about the understanding of the lifespan of the battery, and understand that these lithium polymer batteries, these lithium ion batteries, absolutely do expire. They have a set lifetime. Every time you cycle them, which is charge them and fully discharge them, you're going to have a little bit of decrease in its capability. The voltage performance that you're going to get is going to go down. So we call that battery memory, and that has to do with being measured by, here we go, battery resistance. And that's typically done in milliohms. 0 is not a whole lot. It's pretty much a brand new battery. Well, as 30 milliohms, and this is per cell, 30 milliohms per cell is going to be pretty close to dead. And you'll notice that too, especially if you have advanced telemetry on your drone, because when you start to lift off, which is typically one of the most heavy draw out of your battery, because you don't have a force vector established underneath the drone and what have you, and you're just creating it, so it's got the most load on the motors and the ESCs, you'll see a voltage sag, a real big voltage sag from like the 22.2 or 24 volt that it has down to like 16, and it'll be like, oh, I'm out of battery, when you're really not. It's just the voltage is dropping because the amp draw is so high. And that's your telltale that your drone is not going to be doing quite so well. And so your flight parameters that you're trying to go for when you're trying to plan, like, hey, I only consume this much electricity per minute of flight. I need a 30-minute flight, so I need to put this much on my drone, especially for like the 30-pound cap that you have on the drones. That you won't be able to get that predicted performance, and that will affect your ability to actually get the data or perform your task. So that's something to keep in mind. One thing I always recommend, I get gaffer's tape and a silver Sharpie, and I put gaffer's tape on my drones, and I just tap or tag them like with dashes every single time I cycle it. And then I test them with a balancer. Let's see, I have a balancer right here. Let me show you guys. So RC balancers are really, really great because what they'll do, let me go ahead, just do my show again. How do I get out of here? There we go. There we go, stop sharing. Okay, so this is a balancer. You're gonna have a bunch of different leads to it that are attached to a bunch of different drones. And typically what they'll do, iCharger is a great brand, not trying to necessarily plug, but you'll see a lot of RC enthusiasts, whether they're helicopter pilots, airplane pilots, RC car pilots, they'll use one of these iChargers. And what it'll do is it will tell you per cell what the resistance is, because you'll have, with the battery, you do have these leads, but you also have a balance cable. And that's going to give you telemetry on every single one of your cells. One of the biggest problems you can have if you overdraw a drone battery is you'll have the cells get out of alignment with one another. You'll have one cell drop too low, one cell be too high, and they need to be pretty much all the same voltage, or else you're going to have a lot of issues. If you undercharge or you overdraw a drone battery, like down to like below 3.4, many chargers will not charge it because it's become unstable too low. However, with balancers, there are tricks that you can do to jumpstart the battery cells back up to the 3.4, and you'll be able to tell a lot more information about the batteries. And that's a huge component of reliable performance out of your drones. Also, as a note, if your drone battery does eventually expire, you run through its lifetime and what have you, you can take these batteries to Home Depot. They do have a battery disposal you can use. That's typically what I do when my batteries are done and they go bad. I just take them to Home Depot, go to the customer service area, and you can just say, hey, I have these batteries, and they'll dispose of them for you. Super easy. And I only got a couple minutes left, so I want to talk one last little bit about tracking your flight logs, battery cycling, as far as any repairs. What you want to do is track all of the maintenance. There's a couple other components. Bearing maintenance. If you're running drones constantly, you want to track your batteries. You want to track, most of the drone is a solid state system, but the only main areas of wear that you're going to see are going to be your bearings, because they're the only moving part on the drone, and they're going to be your batteries, which take the frontal load wear, the electrical wear. They act as a sort of buffer to the whole electrical system. Your flight controller isn't going to go bad after a while necessarily. So you want to look at bearing maintenance. You'll start to notice a whine and a grind when these bearings start to go bad, and they'll typically start to go bad if you have a rough landing or if you crash in the context of racing drones. So that's always something to keep in mind. And then taking it, and I'll put up here in the chat here in a second, your pre-flight checklist. So that's always something to keep in mind. That's pretty much all I got. Let me go ahead and put the the pre-flight checklist up for you guys. Do we have any questions in the chat?
I don't see any questions right offhand, but Evan, there's a lot of elements that you talk about for to participate and to fly in our airspace at this time. When we wrap around going back to the workforce, what do you see? Do you see private 107 pilots flying as a contractor for companies, or do you see it moving into the industry, the companies hiring specifically the 107 pilots to work for their company so that they have a certain training that they can also expand the training for that specific need? What are you seeing, at this time in the industry?
What I'm seeing is mainly people that have flight experience, that have run missions, that can interact with the national airspace and have a background in whatever vertical they're looking at. So having a base understanding of, if you're in GIS, environmental, health and safety, things like that those are needed to get in the door. But having the understanding of drone operations, FAA regulations, how to run a successful operation, I've seen it being very pivotal, that you can, especially if you're, for instance, in like surveying, right? And you have to use a LiDAR. That's an expensive widget. They're really concerned with how well can you actually fly the drone, because if that widget goes down and it breaks, that's really expensive. So that's really what I've seen, is people that have an understanding of drone operations, the safety, the regulation, the end-to-end understanding of how to operate in the air.
I agree with you. And I also see that, if you don't have that understanding and experience, you can always start as a visual observer. If you're going into the actual operation of the drone. There are so many other elements that, data collecting, you don't have to fly. You don't have to understand that. You just have to understand how you're going to capture that data and how you're going to deliver it to the customer. And the logistics, maybe you don't have experience with the pilot as a pilot, but as a logistics, you've got to understand all the elements that it takes to get that operation out in the field and actually be successful. So I think all of that is so important. And I love the idea that with this Know Before You Fly Your Drone, this platform, you've always ended it with common sense. No matter what you do, you really have to take these considerations that you've brought up every single time in these workshops of what you have to keep in mind to be a success and to be a responsible pilot. Because obviously, this industry is going to be like Sharon and Dawn said, it's going to rocket. And it's going to really affect us day-to-day living general public. I think the general public's starting to get the idea, but I think it's going to get, like a snowball effect. It's really going to catch on and people are going to understand it. People are going to want to be involved in it. So thank you so much for 23 times you've been with us doing this session. And by the way, for the audience, all of these are recorded. So please go back, look at, like Dawn Dawn did that diversity one in June is what she did. And then we went all the way back to the very beginning where it was just preparing for your 107. And even those facts are still, I think, relevant to this day of what they're going to be covering in those tests. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're almost ready to close. I wanted to make an official announcement that the drone education is going to continue. I'm working with a company called Wings, and they broadcast, again, free workshops, free education on the FAA website. And then we're going to share it with the North Central Texas Council of Governments website, and then also Sharon Rossmark. So stay tuned on that. I put the link in there. It's called droneeducationlive.net. And we're going to be doing some teasers. Dawn Zaldi did the very first one on her law tech in her curriculum that she's working with or has put together. So that's wonderful. I'm really excited that we're going to continue doing this, and we will continue putting the links along with the information on what's coming up. So with that being said, I wanted to give the mic to Ernest Huffman. Again, he's the one that inspired us, put this together, and had this vision long before even I did. So thank you. Go ahead, Ernest.
Thank you, Maggie, and special thanks to Maggie and her team, Sharon Ross, Mark and Evan Morelli. When we put this concept together for these Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshops, we didn't know what we had in store. We didn't know how to go about it. And then we got a wrench thrown in the works with COVID and having to switch to a fully virtual platform. But I think we figured it out, guys, and I appreciate you guys for your help and the strong work you've done these last 2 years in getting this together. Also special thanks to our sponsors. So we got Chariot, Lens Pen, Elm Aerial Services, Women in Drones, UAS Plus Services, Gleam Aviation, Fox Fury, Light Solutions, AUVSI Lone Star Chapter, and Drone Plus as our sponsors for this event. Special thanks to you guys. Without you and your continued support, this wouldn't have been able to work out. Also special thanks to, I see a lot of folks who've attended a lot of these meetings. You've come in every single week. Thank you for your participation. Thanks for sharing this event. Continue to go back, check out the segments of the show that you're interested in on our YouTube page. And also congratulations to Maggie for continuing to do this. I'm glad to hear that. That's what I wanted the outcome to be from these sessions. More workshops, spread your gospel around the country, get out of North Texas and do your business. Once again, thank you guys for helping us today and attending, and see you guys soon.
Yeah, and we would love to have your feedback, even today. You know, what you want to see in the future. You know, how this has been valuable to you, and so that we can continue doing this. So again, I want to thank Sharon Rossmark and Evan Morelli as my partners, helping to put this together and being flexible enough. We started it 2019 with the FAA. And that was the very first workshop was live, and we were doing it all together. And then again, like Ernest said, it's kind of exploded, and we had to rethink how we were going to reach out to our audience. So I think this has been a fantastic platform. I feel honored that we were chosen to be able to deliver the message about flying safe in the air and integrating with aircraft and also the general public. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for their time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you with the droneeducationlive.com. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
Salute.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.